Hey, everybody in TLDC land, welcome. We are back with Kathy LaMee, and we were just actually chatting a little bit backstage. We're realizing that we have basically collected a group of folks together who want to talk about the LMS. We don't have any vendors or anything. We're all, many of us have expertise in different areas. We've all done some pretty interesting projects. And so Kathy is here to talk to you today about some of the things that she's done. She's got a really unique use case. And she is the co-founder of CK Digital Learning Solutions, but I'll also go ahead and let her introduce herself and tell you a little bit more. We'll get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Toddy. So I'm Kathy, and I figure you probably, a lot of you might have seen me in other sessions, but one of my probably not favorite things, but it is kind of a fun thing, is working with LMSs and doing implementations, because I love a good mystery. In fact, I just did a bunch of girlfriends and I do a party every year. We get together and we pick one of those puzzle boxes. And so we did Death at a Dive Bar. Totally fun. And that's kind of how I approach the LMS too, is there's so many things that you have to remember, and there's evidence, and, there aren't any suspects, but, it is. Oh, yes, exactly. It can be a fishing expedition because you have to find all this information. So you really do get to use kind of those investigative skills to question stakeholders and, people on the team and all of that. So what I thought I'd share today is one that I just did for a nonprofit client out of Chicago. And this was to empower facilitators through an LMS implementation. So it was definitely a little bit of a different use case. And let me know if my audio starts going weird. I just saw like a thing pop up. So
yeah, it sounds fine so far.
Okay, good. So I thought I'd go through this. It was a case, I just put together a case study, and I'm going to share this. It's something that's going to be out on our website at CK Digital for just, for informational purposes. So I thought I would just take you through it and kind of where we started and just tell you the story about this implementation. So the first thing to know is that they have no idea what an LMS is. So this is an organization that does social emotional learning for small groups. So their goal and what they started out as was a program that was led by psychologists and psychiatrists. We're talking clinical people that wanted to go into especially schools that needed some extra intervention. So if they had kids that showed up in the dean's office or the vice principal's office on a recurring basis because of behavioral challenges, they focused in a lot of this. And what they're thinking is that by teaching these kids that were middle school through high school how to kind of have those interpersonal skills that they may be missing out on as part of their home life or part of their community life. These are like high gang areas. It's in Chicago. So a lot of the schools and the kids that were participating in this, because they did this program for 2 years prior to us becoming involved, it was all paper. It was in binders. It was a very small production, but it was very effective. And what they discovered, they got a grant to make this a national scalable program. And so the challenge, which I'll show you here, I'll just move to and I'm a horrible presentator with PowerPoints when I haven't been doing it a lot. So I'm just going old school here, guys. So just bear with me.
Yeah, we can see your slide.
Awesome. So basically, and I'll bump this up just a little bit. Oh, that's a lot. There we go. So the original program, like I said, was in Chicago. They received a grant to take this SEL program to schools nationwide, and they needed to implement it in a way that could not only train all the facilitators, but enable them to gather data necessary to the grant's requirements. So that was the biggest to do, right? How do we implement this? And they had already chosen an LMS unbeknownst to us because they didn't know it was something that we knew. And then about a year into building the content, because what we were originally tasked with was to build content that would upskill the facilitators. So we needed to, instead of having people fly out to a location and train them, we needed to create online learning opportunities. And then they did kind of a blended delivery, because they would do a workshop. But this would be like, the topic would be on values, right? And so it was helping the facilitators get in touch with their own ideas of what values meant to them, to be able to then influence and help guide the conversations in the learning plans and the lesson plans that they had for the kids. So we were actually building, it was a weird one. We were building content to train the facilitators on the topics, but also give them best practices as they go into these small circles, because what's happening is they weren't clinicians anymore. Now we're tapping people. It's a lot of deans. It could be parents. It could be teachers, but we found that a lot of teachers were like, I'm already tapped out in the classroom. I am not doing this. And so it's a lot of the support staff in the schools. So they may not have experience facilitating small groups. So we did a lot of that. So that's just the background on this program, because I wanted to make sure, kind of understand how the LMS fit into this, because it was such a strange one. So I've kind of outlined the challenges. So again, it's that whole, how do we get this information out in a consistent, strategic way, and also account for different levels of skill. So our objectives with the client were to develop that training program, but then to create a centralized learning hub. So it's like a learning location, and also be able to track the data. And the big one that was really hard was that and it didn't come up until later, was that they needed to be able to protect their intellectual property. So one of the other interesting aspects of this is, when I started this, I was working with a team that was 2 people for this organization. It was the director and then like the curriculum director. And they are both clinicians, PhD'd, very, very intelligent people. Then they started hiring their staff. So they hired an LMS administrator. They hired marketing to go out and actually market the program. And so it was one of their directors that came from another LMS, actually an implementation, was very concerned about their intellectual property. So whereas we had originally thought, oh, they can just download these PDFs of the lesson plans, take them into the classroom. No. So that was challenge number 1. They didn't want anything to be able to be downloaded and shared with other schools, because this is such a proprietary, and they need that data. Like, they wanted to keep it very protected. So there were a lot of fun conversations around that, and a lot of brainstorming. And so just to let you guys know, the LMS platform that we were using is Absorb, which, if you're familiar with, I know Toddy's familiar. It's a very easy to use and understand platform. And so you think going in, well, this will be easy because it's an easy platform, and we can just pop the modules in. It has collaborative spaces in it, which was another thing that they were looking for, was a place for their circle leaders, is what they're called, their facilitators, to get together and ask questions of their curriculum specialists, who were the organization's kind of keeper of the knowledge, and they kind of helped facilitate, and they oversaw schools to make sure the program was getting done. And so they wanted them to be able to go in also to track. And I'm so sorry, they've decided it's playtime behind me. So I know, it's real, right? I work from home. It's just what it is. But yeah, so I just totally lost my train of thought. Where was I? All right, somebody in the audience, tell me the last thing I said.
We're talking about the requirements.
Absorb. Yes. Absorb. All right. So so they needed that collaboration space, and they needed to be able to have different people. So the curriculum specialists who work for the organization I was partnering with, but also the administrators for the school districts. So like the superintendents and people that are invested in purchasing this program needed to be able to access data as well to show the value. So it's all about ROI and proving data for this one. But it was such an interesting case because the people that I was working with had never experienced an LMS, didn't understand what all could be done in it. And so they would come and they'd be like, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do, and they'd have all these questions. And it's like, where Absorb is easy to use, it's also very templated. And so you can do things to a certain extent within the LMS, and you can also work with their product specialists, and they can actually, write in code and build some different really cool things like unique URLs for different school districts. We could brand it. I was like, we can brand it for each school. So they come in and they see your name and they see the school district, and it feels personal and like it was built just for them, which it was, but then, also for all the other 50 schools or whatever, and we just wanted it to be scalable. So it was really fun. And I'm going to take you to, like I said, this is kind of an overarching case study. So I'll just kind of focus in on the LMS pieces for this. But if anybody has any questions about the rest of it, again, it'll be out on our website. And I figured I'd offer it just as a downloadable to everybody on the call today too, if you want to go through it. So here you can see that the weaknesses, again, this is probably the biggest part. They had no clue. They had no experience working with any of the digital tools. They would call the e-learnings, an e-learning, it would be a video. I'm sure others of you have experienced that where they're like, the videos. It's like, you mean the e-learning? Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. And so threats were real. I think the resistance to change, because again, this was also a nonprofit. So we were dealing with our stakeholders, who were the two people that we'd started with. But then we also had a larger level of more stakeholders as we got into this project and started the implementation. We had data analysts that had come on board. We had the LMS admin, and again, like the director of the program. So they'd added like 5 or 6 more staff. So now we've got like 8 to 10 people, but we also have their stakeholders, which is their board of directors for this nonprofit program. And so we'd think we were all on board with something, and then they'd be like, no, you need to change this because it's part of an umbrella program. And so we get into like branding and all of that with the LMS, which thankfully, again, Absorb, super easy to brand. So part of the initial part of what I did was actually go in and build the LMS itself. And I'm going to flip over to this slide for you guys. This is like best practices, and I totally want to add to this. This was just me brainstorming. But these were the big 3 things that I think for an LMS implementation, they're key to focus on. So first of all, communication. Very much so as I looked back in this and did like a post-mortem reflection, one of the biggest things was setting up communication. We did a really good job at the beginning of having our weekly stand-ups and our calls. But then as the project took legs and started to grow and you started to see silos pop up, so you've got like the tech people working on the tech side of things and the backside of how they're going to, they wanted to bring the data into like Power BI, and, they're starting to use all of these data analytic tools with it, which there are integrations. So you as an ID or as an LMS admin have to kind of learn the language so that you can then take that and plug it into where you need to understand it to be able to answer questions about how there's functionality in the LMS itself. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that you think it's going to be really easy to implement this LMS, but then there's the periphery. And I think that for me is the part that is the hardest. And it's the part you have to focus on, or you find yourself back at square one, which I've had in the past, because believe it or not, I actually helped build an LMS, like a homegrown one many years ago, pre-Flash. I told Tati I was not going to talk about that because it was like a horror story, because that was when I learned all of these lessons, which was, and it was over 10 years ago. So I was still relatively new into corporate L&D. I worked in government before that. So it was really interesting, understanding that the processes in government don't work the same as the processes in corporate. And so a lot of that learning has happened, and a lot of it is organic knowledge of how to approach an LMS, right? So you have to start at the very beginning, seeing the big picture and the outcome. You can't just look at that LMS and go, oh, I want to make it pretty, because you're going to do that, right? You're going to brand it and make it beautiful and make it functional. But you have to remember, what is the outcome? Like, what are we looking for data? What are you guys looking for this, in this case, very specifically, what do you have to report back to the grant holder, that gave you this big, huge chunk of money? We're talking millions. They have to be accountable to that. So yeah, this program is to go for a couple years. And so that had us taking steps back. And so a lot of what I found myself doing wasn't just building the LMS, it was educating the team that was going to support the LMS for this program. And, really talking about, and you can see it's probably like a duh to a lot of us, but naming conventions and version control. If people don't understand that, because that's not in their wheelhouse, right? They haven't actually had to do this for anything that they've been doing up to this point. But you have to make sure that you have that, so that moving forward, when something's been updated, so that you can assess your data, knowing if it was pre or post this data point. So, and I'm a data nerd. I love data and statistics, and I just love it. But you have to have those things in place so that you can get the data at the end, right? Mm-hmm. And then creating the roadmap. That was another one that it's like, here's all the things that we're going to do. Now, here's everything we have to do for each of these steps. And you would find yourself getting to a point where I had a subcontractor that was working on uploading things and doing that. And she'd be like, well, I can upload these. I'm like, well, no, you can't, because we have to build out this learning path first. And so within that learning path, and then set up, the rules, the enrollment rules, because they also didn't want people to move ahead. But because of the intellectual property, this is where it got tricky, was they decided to use Storyline to put in the bulk of the lesson plan, so that people could pull it up and use it on their mobile device or their laptop when they're facilitating. And then they had a printable they called it a note catcher. So it had key information in it that they needed to make sure they covered during that lesson. And then it had space for them to take notes, either virtually, it was a writable PDF, or they could print it out if they wanted to. But that was what they had to go in to facilitate. They had an electronic item, which was the intellectual property protection. And then they had the downloadable, which was for their notes and their use during the session. So that was interesting. And we had to kind of back up a few times, but it was only because I would say, you can't start here. There's nothing we can do here because this hasn't been met yet. And so a lot of that was, I felt like I was a broken record a lot of the time. I'm like, well, yes, but that was my go-to. Well, yes, but if we do this, then it affects, A, B, C, D. So again, it was, it was just a big thing. And the other thing, and I kind of left this with them when I handed it over, it was like a month and a half ago. I'm like, here's what I need you to do. I need you to make sure, because they had hired an instructional designer to continue building more courseware as they develop the program bigger. And then their LMS admin, who had experience with LMS, but more so in an academic setting. So think Canvas and Blackboard, so a little different. But very eager and willing to learn, and understood all the technical terminology. So, coming out of it. But one of my biggest things for them was that they needed to make sure that as they were doing this implementation, because it was kind of a rolling implementation, that they make sure that they use a daily or weekly touch point. Because one of the biggest pitfalls that they were experiencing, that they didn't know that they were experiencing, was that people were working on solutions and not communicating. So they were working on solutions for their aspect of the implementation, but they weren't coming together as a larger group to talk about what they were doing. And that was one of the things that I learned the hard way, is that you have to have those conversations, and you have to figure out what cadence you need. It might be every day for a certain segment, and then it might be, we just need to touch in a couple times. So making sure that you're allowing for that space to have those conversations is so critical, because something that I'm working on might influence something that Toddy is working on, but she doesn't know it and I don't know it. So having that kind of just 5-minute, 10-minute, here's what we're working on, here are our challenges, and seeing if anybody else has a solution, it just makes it just so much more transparent. And instead of just, a person over here holding it up and a person holding it up over here, you've got everyone lifting that up, I guess, is a good thing. And then the last thing is the pilot. Very, very important. And you can happen in different ways, and it's going to be different for each organization. You have to figure out what, again, you're testing for and what you're looking for and how you're solving for those issues. So, coming back and being able to have those conversations about, okay, well, we know they're completing these courses, but are they, what's going on? Like, what do we need to see in the reporting, and making sure that not just the courseware that's, available, and that they're seeing the tiles in the appropriate place on their home screen, and, that it's taking them to the correct things, organizing resources, leveraging those collaborative spaces, which was a whole nother thing with Absorb. It's, Absorb, what is it? Collab or collaborate? I can't remember now.
Yeah, I think it's collab.
Collab, yeah. So that was fun. And then too, working with your product specialist, always fun, because they are tech people, and you kind of act as this translator of sorts from people who are, at least from my experience, it was taking what their squishy picture of happiness would be, of like everything they want to get out of it as a clinician and as an organization doing social emotional teaching. Like, it's very touchy feely, and then getting that information over, even so much as understanding for the product person to understand who the learners are, because in this case, the learners are something completely out of the norm. It's not like an employee onboarding, right? So, and they would use it for that eventually as well. But the main intention behind this was to strategically grow this program and to be able to get data to present to the stakeholders and to their grant writer. So it was very interesting. So I can skip around, but I thought if you guys have questions or anything else that you want to talk about?
I mean, just like, no questions yet. I have to say, there's a lot of nuances here too. It's like things that you don't think can be translated, in an LMS. Sometimes, like you mentioned, you are that middle person. The things that seem undoable, you might be able to work with somebody on the back end, but again, that's another person you have to work with and communicate with on the LMS team to say, okay, so how can we do a workaround on this? Trust me, I've done a lot of workarounds in LMS before.
Yeah.
How can I get the reporting out that gives them this detail that's not really there, but we'll figure out how to get it, kind of thing.
Yep.
So yeah.
Oh yeah. That brings up another one. They had an interesting ask. They also survey their facilitators, and they also survey their students, but the students aren't in the LMS, right? So they actually will do either electronic, like SurveyMonkey, I think is what they used, but they were using a different survey, or they were handing out like paper surveys to the students and then gathering that information, scanning the documents in, and having it as a storage. And so, and I stepped out of the project before I don't know what they ended up, but it was part of that Power BI, and they were working with the analyze portion of Absorb, which is where all those connections take place. But they really wanted to import data from SurveyMonkey. And it's like, well, we could import it, but it's not reportable in the LMS. So it's like, you can give it to the LMS, but there's no way for the LMS to churn that through and add it to its reporting. And so there was a lot of conversation around that, which was something that I hadn't dipped into before, was analyzed. So I sat in on every time they did like a presentation or a discussion, just so I could learn that side of the LMS, because it's not part of what you would consider a traditional LMS, right? It's really
an upsell, if I remember correctly. It's actually the Analyze module, I think, is an upsell.
It is. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, it's got a whole different set of features behind it as well. Yeah, it's always interesting because, if you can afford to do that, then there are better integrations on that. And we talked a little bit about integrations yesterday, but again, sometimes you don't know what you need until you need it.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden you discover, oh yeah, I really do need to look at, bolting that onto the system or turning that module on. Gail Pearson is asking if you were the project manager on this. Were you the PM on it?
So yes, because they didn't have a dedicated PM.
Okay. Who am I
And
to help?
so yeah, so and it morphed. So like I said, I was brought in for a different, I was brought in to create the content and build
Okay.
them and do all of that. And then I think it was probably, well, let's see, I started in April of last year, or no, April
Mhm,
of
mhm.
2022. Yes, no, 2023. Started, I'm like, what day is it? I started in April of last year, and around September, October is when they said, "Oh, and we have an LMS." And literally that's how they like dropped it was,
Oh,
"Oh yeah,
wow.
by the way," in the middle of a meeting where we were just going through like standard review content, update changes, because I was doing a lot of sourcing of like academic literature and things to support, the theory behind, why kids need to learn how to do whatever. And so we'd have these normal meetings. And then they were like, yeah, do you know anything about that? And I'm like, well, what did you buy? And they told me, I said, oh my God, that's just so coincidental because in my position that I left a couple years prior, I had basically done a lot of what was mid COVID. And thankfully I had LMS experience then because we had one LMS admin for a 60,000 employee global. Yeah. And so
Thanks.
I had been doing a lot of the work for we had like a work at home remote team, and it was like 3,000 people. So I worked with her and I did a lot of that, and she did more of the global. But then when COVID happened and we had to basically redo how we taught everything, I got a lot more exposure and experience to that. And let me tell you, when you accidentally enroll every member of your 60,000 person organization,
Done that. Yes, I have. Actually,
I
it was over
know. And
30,000.
there's no stop button, right? There's no cancel button on that in Absorb. I was like, I just sat there and had to watch it, and it took forever because 60,000 people.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and then unenrolled them the next day. But I was like, oh my gosh. So, it happens. And, it's like the who ate my cheese out of the fridge. You just move on.
Well, and if somebody's already taken the unit, by the time you want to start unenrolling people, then you've got more problems. And yeah, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah. So it was nice. We blended in, and I was able to leverage that knowledge and help them.
Mhm, mhm.
Again, it was a lot of project managing. It was a lot of consulting. So that was a lot of my time because the actual build itself doesn't take very long. It's very
Right.
quick, but you really have to get all of your answers up to a certain point before you can even start building, because otherwise you're going in and you're deleting things. And if you even start to use a course, this was another thing. If you go in and you start a course in Absorb, there's data attached to that already. So as soon as you touch it, there's data that's attached. So you can't just go in and delete it. A lot of times it's like, nope, there's data. You can't do that. So you just have to inactivate it. And then my
Right.
perfectionist brain just goes, oh, and then it comes up every time somebody's like, well, I thought we got rid of this course. I'm like, we did. It's inactive. It's just
Right.
ignore it.
Right. Yep.
So it's all of those little things. And really, I think preparation is so key in an implementation. You just really have to come up with that. And I know Toddy's doing a lot of work on that, and creating those kind of checklists and guides. And this is your best practice going forward. I've been more of a, oh, whoops, I fell into this. You talk about the accidental ID. I'm an accidental LMS admin.
Yeah, same here. And we could write volumes on every aspect of
We
this.
really could.
It's complex. I don't think people realize how complex it can be because you're looking at not just configuration, but governance. Governance gets established by your organization for their needs, but configuration is often an IT thing. It can be depending on what units your groups decide that they need turned on or turned off. It's depends on how many users you have in an audience, but it can be very complex. So I did actually find that Absorb actually had some more configurable instances per user group, because I had internal and external users while I was using it. So that made it a little simpler. I'm curious, how many people on the chat right now have been LMS admins? I'm just curious if anybody will let us know, because that's a whole special animal in itself. Saw a few thumbs up here, but yeah, it's certainly interesting. And what you're doing here in terms of setting best practices really should be best practices when you're using an LMS for almost anything. Is like, even if you're just putting out a course, or if you're putting out an entire series of courses, you've got an internal or an external audiences to go through and come up with your comms plan, think about the potential things that could happen, and then also do a pilot to the at the beginning, to make sure that it's usable and consumable the way they think it will be. Anyways, didn't mean to sidetrack.
No. I honestly, I wasn't sure how long we were going today either. So it's just kind of pausing too.
We usually are around 45 minutes, and most of us, me, I end up talking longer. So
let's see.
Who knows? It could be so fascinating. It really is interesting stuff. So
yeah, no, I just think it really it is. And I think this was one of my favorite projects to date, just because I had a wonderful group of people to work with. I tend to be a little headstrong sometimes in getting my point. So I will say that we had a little bit of a struggle over the whole intellectual property download thing, because I was like, I put the caveat out there to the team that when they've done the first, because it's like by semester, I'm like, when you get your feedback from the first semester, I really want to know how they liked having to use it electronically for the lesson plans, because I felt like that was a huge, here, let me just tie my hand behind my back and put a hand over my eye as far as a facilitator, because you're like, I'm imagining these, it's a dean or whoever, right? Or a counselor, and they have their regular workload, and they have to prep. So we had everything time restricted. You had to do it, and then you had to report in, and then you also had to do a post circle survey to talk about how many kids were there, what, and anything that came up. And you had to do that for each one. So if you ran 3 circles because you had that many kids in the program, then you would do that for each one of them. So there was a lot of technical, or just, I guess, tangible things they had to do. And then to take this knowledge and go into a group of kids that, let's face it, I don't want to facilitate a group of middle schoolers. Been there, done that. I'm like, so it's, you're challenged with behaviors that are happening in the group. And then you're looking at the slice of kids that you have coming in. There's already a level of more intense actions that would need to be taken with them. And so I would have loved to, I keep hoping they'll do an implementation out here in Washington. I think they have a school in Seattle that they're working with, and I just really want to go and just experience it. But, the LMS itself, just understanding how they were able to use it and if it was effective for what they were looking for, as a facilitator, and from that side of things. And then also just, as the admin, and as they grow it, just learning what experiences they've had, and getting data, and using Analyze, and getting all the goods together. Like, it's just, that's the problem when you are an independent consultant, or, you're coming in as a consultant, is you don't always get to see the outcome. So I try to build relationships so that I can still get the outcomes, because I'm really curious, and I'd love to add it to my case study, of course. So
absolutely. Yeah, and this is a use case I never thought of before. And I don't know why I didn't, because the data's there. You can actually go through and analyze the data, and if you need that reporting, the reporting is reporting, right? So it's hard and fast. It's your system of record, like it would be anywhere. But I actually, in the way back, I was part of the original launch for edX. And part of the intent for the launch for edX was to be able to collect learning data on the back end. And to be able to surface that data in terms of virtual learning. So, it looked like it was, really bent on making sure that everybody had opportunities to learn, which it was. That was originally part of the foundation of it. But it was also to be able to figure out what kind of learning data they could pull from it. So, but yeah,
Very
I
cool.
never thought of using, your commercial LMS for something like that. Very
Yeah,
cool.
it is. I think it'll be interesting to see where we go. I haven't had the chance yesterday to sit in on anybody else's sessions, but I think just, there are so many LMSs out there, and I think that can be overwhelming to people too. And then it depends on how good your salesperson is if you don't know what you're looking for. So I'm
Right.
hopeful that organizations will reach out to people or find people that have that knowledge, that know what they're looking for, because I've also seen implementations that went horribly wrong because they didn't have those people on board. And it's hard because you don't know what you don't know, right? You think, oh, it's an LMS. Again, like I said, it seems easy, and it is easy, but the rest of the story is where it's hard, or it's just, it's more.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Well, and you're talking about an LMS that actually has an analyze unit that goes on the back end of it. Whereas in our last conversation, we were talking about, sometimes the only thing you can get out of an LMS is complete or incomplete. You know
yes.
what I mean? Depending on how it's set up. And there actually are some newer LMSs that will tell you just even barely that much information,
Mm,
which, is not really a good tool for really understanding your program. But yeah, very cool stuff. Nice.
awesome.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So,
Any other questions, or we're good? I don't see anything. So
yeah, actually, hang on. No. So, in terms of like making the decision on this learning management system, was it already in place and someone else had already made the selection and handed off to you? Did you have
yep.
any latitude to say, yeah, this just won't work? Or yes, it's a great fit, but we need to add the analyze unit. Were you given that kind of power at all, or?
So they had already purchased it. I'm not even sure who purchased it, and or why. They just
Okay.
had said it was already done. And at that point it wasn't, it was already done. So I didn't really dig into it.
Okay.
And then it was just finding out what they purchased. And I think that they probably landed on Absorb because of the analyze feature. Like that was a
Mhm,
big part
mhm,
of what they
mhm.
were doing. And again, because that's how they get their funding, they have to show that information. So it was really being able to manipulate data to have like a powerful story of,
Interesting.
yeah, what, how successful it was in the schools, and,
Mhm.
just kind of coming back around and being able to implement changes. So yeah, it was, it was pre-selected in this case. I've done some where I've helped kind of pull together different LMS options, facilitated, the show and tell, come on in, tell us why we should pick your LMS, and,
Sure.
formulating the questions to ask. I think that's the biggest thing too when you're going through and selecting an LMS is, again, like I have here with the forward thinking, that goes back to before you even select an LMS, because again, and honestly, right now, my partner and I were looking at LMS or just solutions to get content out. And so it's been interesting, looking at different types of LMS, like who considers it. So you've got like the more academic things, Blackboard, Canvas, and then you have the corporate, which, we've got all of our old favorites that I don't even want
Right.
to say the names.
Mhm, mhm.
And then, have, like, I really like Absorb. And then I always say it backwards because of Articulate. It's 360 Learn, I think is the name of
Yeah,
it.
I think
And
it's learn. Maybe.
is it
Yeah,
Learn
maybe.
360? I say it backwards every
One of the two.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they've got good, they do, I sign up for a lot of, newsletters and blog posts from LMS because there tends to be a really good overlap of information, and it also keeps you up to date on kind of what the trends are that people are
Right.
seeing in the LMS. So if you're doing that type of work, I recommend those. I have a few that I follow. But I think that's important because then, kind of off the top, you're able to kind of sort through. And then, because then you have like the Thinkifics and more external facing, I want to sell courses. And it's technically an LMS because, especially with Thinkific now, they've actually just recently upgraded to accept SCORM wrapped packages. I mean, you can
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
upload SCORM now. And I'm like, oh, hey, that's
yeah.
new.
That's actually a good thing that they're finally doing that. It's been a few
Yes.
years. So, and it's interesting. So if you do have actually recommendations for blogs and things like that that are independent, I think that most of our audience can really use those. If you want to put out something into our show notes, that's helpful. You and I both know that there are certain entities out there that will rank and stack, learning systems out there, kind of pay to play. And I've seen those pay to play listings before, like the top 15 or whatever.
They're
And
not,
you see,
don't pay attention.
you see stuff there that just never belonged there in the first place. I mean, you kind of the old standards, but it's definitely not a simple task. And I tell people this all the time: if you can ever go through a former analysis of alternatives when you're at this point, when you're making a selection for an LMS, you'll be much happier for it, because what you'll be doing is looking at your business use cases, your requirements against those, and coming up with specific cases that you can use to have that demonstrate against. Like how do you do this? Give them a use case that's difficult, and see how they perform under pressure, in order to see what that workflow looks like in the LMS. And really put them to the test, and collect those use cases and test against them, and then double test against them with like user acceptance tests too. The AOA is again another. I'm so project management oriented, but an analysis of alternatives is really very programmatic and prescribed, done because you're pulling in your requirements and you do your business analysis up front. If anybody has questions on that too, I can send you more information, because we actually, when we made the selection for a former employer, we went through the AOA process, arrived at essentially our top three, which almost everybody does. You bring it down to the top three, but then we went through. Have you ever gone through a Moscow analysis? It's called MOSCOW, Moscow, I think is how they do it.
Okay.
But what it is going through, once you've decided that you've actually met the requirements, then you go through and you triage them in terms of must have, nice to haves, and everything gets stacked, ranked out that way, so you can kind of sort through it and say, okay, it has all of our must haves. It doesn't have a few things that are our must haves, or it touches basically on nice to haves, but we can kind of push those aside. It's an interesting analysis technique that I hadn't learned before I worked for this company, but it turned out to be really useful in the evaluation of which LMS we were going to settle on. And so again, tell people you can't make this stuff up. It is really detailed, the things that you go through to roll out learning, to choose an LMS, to do the e-learning, to get things rolled out, to assign it, to unassign it if you've to 60,000 people, or replace a file versus update a file. I mean, like, there's just all these little minutia things, and people wonder why it gets so involved, or why it takes so long sometimes to get learning out. These are the reasons why. So
no, it is really important. I was going to say the replacing files and whatnot, that's where you have to be very careful. And that's where those naming conventions are so important.
Absolutely.
And version control, because if you are, let's say you have an introduction to LMS course, right? And you add it and you build it, and then it goes through, you've got survey results back, and you're like, oh, we need to add some more information on this. This isn't so relevant. This has changed. And you go and you create this new content. If you add it as a new course, then you're essentially starting your data collection over. But if it's the same course and it's the same intention and you're tracking the same, outcomes, then you really want to just replace that content so that it's building. And then you have that data point. And in your comments in Absorb, you can put in the notes when you updated it. You can include what the updates were. So there's a lot of tracking ability as an admin or as an ID to be able to do in the system as well. So that's always really nice, because then you don't have to wonder, when was the last time this was this updated, or what was changed in it, and that way you can be informed on it. And so that was another big thing, teaching their their folks to use the system to make it, work more efficiently, not as hard, whatever that saying is. Work
Right.
smarter, not harder.
Right. And until you've done it, you may not think about the fact that it could be a minor update just for some, maybe some grammatical errors, or maybe a question that was, incorrect or correct, versus like a major revision of something with new content, And so again, people have to be trained on these things and figure out, how they do it the correct way. So especially if you're in it to gather data, so you're not losing that data. And I have some really interesting data loss stories. But I'll talk about those tomorrow.
Oh, that for sure.
I had people with privileges to remove things and update.
Oh no.
Yeah. So,
yes, always choose your system admins very carefully.
Exactly. And then that becomes part of your system governance, right? Like, certain people are assigned certain roles. And actually, by the way, Absorb is one of those that allows you to create really nice finite roles within it. You can define what someone can do. Most LMSs do, but in particular, they actually do a pretty good job with it.
Yeah.
So, you can give someone permission to, create reporting, but they can't touch, adding anybody to a class, or they may not be able to erase a class, or, remove something from a learning path. Not that that's ever happened before. So,
Never.
Sorry, definitely we are just about as geeky as they could possibly be. Actually, I think everybody that's attending these sessions are probably a little bit on the geeky side. Anybody that thinks this is fun is like, well, you said it yourself. We like puzzles. So
yeah,
I used to call it LMS forensics. So
yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, it is. It's definitely a niche, right? And I find that it's a nice part of my overall package, I guess, because I don't want to do it every day. I think I would go insane. But it's a great way. Like I'll take projects that are just project management, or that are just, something like this, or consulting, and round it out with some instructional design and whatnot. But I think it's just such an important part of, how you roll out and implement your learning strategy. And it can really influence the culture of your organization as well. And you can take your LMS and really, depending on what you're looking for, again, you can make it whatever you need it to be for that organization. And I think, that's what makes it fun, is being able to be part of that selection process and going, oh, this one really works with our culture. It's got like, you can like things, you can chat things, you can do, this or that or the other thing. So that's a lot of it too, as opposed to an organization that's like, nope, we really just need it to house our knowledge base and training. That's all we want it for.
Right. And compliance learning and check the boxes.
Yeah,
complete. Yeah, because I've actually seen LMSs that were just so basic that they were really intended just for audit purposes. Yes, no. Yep. Did somebody go through a skills, or task analysis and pass everything? But when you can implement something that gives you like data behind the scenes, and we talked earlier in the last session about data analytics, but if you're able to pull data and prove out something using the LMS, then it's actually become, a little bit more of an advanced tool. It provides something to you that allows you to go back and do more. So, there's some good stuff in it too. Yeah, there's lots of selections out there too. I don't know. I think last count I looked, there was probably like 1,200 LMSs.
Oh yeah, it's insane. Like I don't want to know all of these. And I probably get spammed by, I don't know. What do you think? How many do you get spammed by each week? I get them probably
2 or 3. 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's about me too. Yeah. Some weeks I'm like, oh, I didn't get anything.
Yeah. I had a loving term for a lot of systems that I'm, supposed to be introduced to. I call them vaporware, because sometimes that's all they are. So, but it's been interesting. Well, this is cool. And I'm hoping that, people will, ask more questions too, because, are you willing to share your slides?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure how to do that in AirMeet, but is it part of Post Notes?
Oh, yeah, you can actually give them to Luis and he'll share them back out and clears out all his notes because he records everything. So this is a really cool case. I'm actually really interested to know more because I think it would be an applicable way to use an LMS with something that I'm actually looking at doing as well.
Mm.
The project for somebody that has a little bit smaller effort, but you've given me some ideas on this. And I don't think that they would ever even be able to afford something like Absorb because that's not necessarily a cheap tool, but it gives me some ideas on how to pull analytics. Absorb is a Canadian company, in case anybody else doesn't know, but they have some of the best support I've ever seen.
Oh yeah,
in terms
that's
of,
why I was super excited. I was
yeah,
like, oh, we'll be fine.
yeah.
So if they would have said it's Cornerstone, I would have cried in a corner.
3 weeks on a support ticket. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, SkillJar is very similar too. They've got some really good support behind them too. So, and they do again like the external versus the internals kind of thing. So
yeah, and Absorb is built that way as well, which is
right.
nice. Having that e-commerce thing because it was on one of our lists, but price is inhibitive, and there's some other things that don't do what I want it to do. So, because you're right, yeah, if you're pricing something out, it's not horrible, but it's like I think it's like a $3,000 initiation fee regardless, and then you're paying by year by seat and stuff. So it's but
definitely
you don't get that information until you sit down with them. So
no, it's much more of an enterprise level solution,
yes.
but it does create customized URLs for internal or external. You can actually set a URL against it, and you can SSO into internal and external sites, which is nice. So, it's a little bit of doing, and it requires someone on the back end to understand how to set the Azure settings, which again is another integration and requires more work with their tech teams. Anybody who thinks this is easy, this was the main point I walked away with yesterday is like, if you were alone in this effort, please find a team because you're going to need a team for pretty much everything you're ever going to do with implementing an LMS. So cool. Awesome. Well, this has been really good. So, and I'm also so curious to know more someday about how you built your own.
Well, I tell you that I started back in 6th grade. I built my own database of information for the students in my class.
Okay.
Literally like just beginner programming. It was back on Commodore 64s.
Yeah.
Because that's what and then I lost, like, I don't know coding at all anymore, but I could code a game in Commodore 64. But it was a lot like that where you're just putting pieces together and then but it requires a lot of backward thinking. There was a lot of starting over. I don't ever want to do it again.
Reminds me of an episode of Young Sheldon where he built the database. So. Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. And, reach out to either one of us with questions and, we'll go ahead and get the notes out to you guys as well. This is a kind of a special one-off with us because I think we've got some fairly geeky people here who really enjoy that challenge. So all good. Well, thank you.
For all to hang out.
Yeah, and we've got another session tomorrow where I actually will be chatting with Lisa Crockett too, because we're going to talk about reporting out of the LMS and integrations. So that's, like I said, I'll talk a little bit about, having someone remove things from learning paths and erasing data and how to get that back or why, or how integrations can help you. So
yes, for sure.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone, take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.